Welcome to the 156th Layout Tours. I'm Burr Stewart, your host. Today we have a layout tour by Jon Bentz, who lives on Whidbey Island, is in the middle of building an ON30 layout. Bill, do you have any announcements for NMRA?
Well, just a reminder to everybody, if you haven't registered for our PNR convention in Tacoma, the second weekend in May, the 10th to 13th, going to be an amazing event with clinics, layout tours, operating sessions, contest room, the whole 9 yards for the NMRA. Come on and join us and get registered.
Thanks, Bill. Jon, go ahead and introduce yourself, and we look forward to your presentation.
Hi, I'm Jon Bentz. I've been a modeler 60 years, I guess. I started with narrow gauge in 1976 and built a little tiny layout on a hollow core door in HON3. It was just a switching line. Since 2018, I've been working on my Rio Como Railway here in Freeland, and with the help of Alan Murray and Cliff Acker, who both live out here on the island, we've made a lot of progress. There's a little history behind this made-up name, Rio Como, and that was the first layout I built on the hollow core door. It's just sort of stuck around. I like the sound of the name. All the layouts I've built since then, never anything really big. Every layout had a Rio Como somewhere in it. My standard gauge was the Denver, North Park, and Western. That really got going with my N-scale layout, which you see on the right here, which I built. It was featured in N-scale magazine in a two-part article 12 years ago. On the left, you can see the original Rio Como, which was built on a hollow core door and a hand-laid Code 55 rail. I just like the look of it, but I could never quite get the narrow gauge thing going after I got married and had a kid. I just always felt that it was kind of vulnerable to little hands. Anyway, I shifted over to standard gauge HO for a while, and then I had a garden railway in our backyard in Edmonds, and it was featured in Garden Railways 20 years ago now. So that's some of my background. Inspiration for the current Rio Como is drawn from some local modelers who are really outstanding. Chuck Ricketts had a beautiful ON30 layout down in Olympia, and I was really impressed with just the range of structures and the general level of work. I also liked his car float operation. I thought was pretty cool. In addition, Greg Wright's mining railroad, I think it's 3/8 scale. I really like these mine buildings and the detailing around the mine. That's kind of a central feature of the railroad. And then Paul Scholes, we all are familiar with his layout. It just was spectacular. I like the character of it, and it's kind of West Coast narrow gauge style. Of course, his modeling was just outstanding. The prototype is the Nevada County narrow gauge in California. The Nevada Central there's several Nevada narrow gauge railroads that provided some inspiration. You know, it's all small equipment, most of it very old. So I really like the character of these things. They lasted into the 40s and some even the early 50s, and they had this ancient equipment. I started to build some criteria for the new railroad. I wanted a single track main line with sidings, a staging yard, a main yard with engine facilities. The customers would be manufacturing, mining, logging, retail, food distributors, that kind of thing that you might find out in the boonies. Another goal is to have it be large enough to keep 4 to 6 people busy for a 4-hour op session, and simple enough for one person to maintain, which I kind of achieved. But it's a 14 by 30 layout, which is the largest I've ever built, and it is something to keep after. Also, I wanted DCC control and Arduino controls for servo-driven turnouts. Also, Cliff Acker built a Raspberry Pi hotspot so we can have wireless throttles. And I'm going to get a couple of the newer TCS wireless throttles for the mainline operation. Everything else will be tethered, and as I can afford to buy more $300 throttles. This is the plan. The room itself is 14 by 39. And we were originally going to go all the way around, and then it just became clear I needed a place to work on models, to store stuff, and to have a place for a dispatcher. The east end of the layout is Hoover Staging. These are, by the way, family names. Hoover was my paternal grandfather's brother's name, Hoover. Elsie Creek was named after my maternal grandmother. This is kind of the main shops, and then the car float operation is also here. And there are several customers that are served locally. So this is one job. And tied to that is getting trains in and out of the staging yard. The main line kind of disappears under some mountains, reappears on a trestle, disappears again. It comes out at Elwood Park, which is a junction with a short line. The short line connects through a series of switchbacks down here to the main line. Its primary function is moving ore loads from the mining district here around through the mountain back up to a smelter located here. There's also a timber transload here, which provides log loads that are brought down to the interchange where road locomotive takes over from the Heisler that works these branch lines and takes the log loads around to Grotto here, where he runs around his train and shoves up into the sawmill to do switching before pulling empties and then going back to Elwood Park, turning those empties over to the branch line where they're taken back up to the reload. There's also a small engine house and running repair shop and service facility there. So running on around this peninsula into Grotto, there's a mine tipple that's served by an aerial tramway that feeds from this side. And there'll be a mine turn that works out of Hoover Staging all the way around to exchange empties for loads at the mine tipple and then run back to staging. The end of the line is Evans Park, and it has a small engine terminal, a turntable, and then I've built in a John Allen style switching puzzle back here on the backside. These are all remote operated turnouts. So it takes about an hour to an hour and a half to switch this out. So there's a daily freight that comes all the way out here with cars to exchange for empties to take back to staging. Someone will be assigned to switching this. So already we have 1, 2, 3 jobs, plus the mine turn, that's 4 jobs. There's also going to be a daily passenger that runs twice a day. And I think another local freight that'll work all the way to Grotto and back. This is just an idea of the benchwork. I laid this out to get an idea of how many linear feet of lumber we're going to need. This was done when I was still planning a major terminal over here on this wall. That isn't there anymore. It wasn't built. These are progress photos showing, and this is Alan Murray, who was a big help during this phase, putting the benchwork up. The first piece to go in was this ledger board that was mounted against the south wall of the room. It provided a place to anchor the 2 peninsulas, which you can see here and here. It's a modified L-frame benchwork. I turned the L-frame backwards as opposed to the way Kalmbach wants you to build them. And this provided a surface to attach the fascia, which we'll get to here in a little bit. So all the road bed is 1/2-inch ply. It's laid on cork road bed. The track is all micro-engineering. Turnouts are micro-engineering, with the exception of 3 custom curved turnouts. And you can see the typical mess that's associated with this. My workbench and some kit storage, and the dispatcher center is over here on this wall. These other views show parts of Elwood Park, and this is Elsie Creek before we put the car float operation in. The backdrop is a little different too. This is 3/4 inch plywood. We created a slot all the way around the layout for this to drop into. The cove corners, as you can see here, this little bit here is a routed surface that ran from the bottom of the board to the top. And this allowed us to snap in these 1/8 inch Arctic birch cove panels for the backdrop. And it forms a seamless backdrop. Again, here's the raw board. Here's the primed board. And this is some of that backdrop during installation before we manhandled it into position. This is Evans Park being constructed. This is early on. So Cliff Acker painted the backdrop. I just wanted something generic. I'm not sure, at the point we were doing this work, I wasn't sure what the scenery was going to shape up to. So we just put a basic sky backdrop in, hand painted. And we'll determine whether we're going to add some mountains, painted mountains, as we work through the scenery. Again, this typical benchwork construction with these spanning boards, and they provide the upright supports for the roadbed. This is the ore tipple. This is the mining district before started adding in additional platforms for the mines. There'll be 5 mines up in here. This is Elsie Creek, again, early on. This is Elwood Park, and this is comprised of 2 5-foot modules that were built for the On30 modular group, and they were going to be displayed at the 2012 narrow gauge convention, but I dropped one of them the morning of the convention. And so they never made it there. But now they're part of the permanent layout. Stony Creek Engine House, Banta Water Tower, West Side Oil Tank Kit, and I forget who did this water tower. I enjoy building kits a lot, buildings in particular. So here you see the fascia. This is Alan installing the fascia. It's very fortunate that Alan is a cabinet maker. So I got this great fascia. It's just beautiful. And he just was meticulous in putting it in. All the curved pieces, this is a backer support piece that was run around the ends of the peninsulas and supports the bottom edge of the fascia material. So it keeps it rigid. And here's the finished fascia. And then later on, we started installing control panels. I'll get into that in a little bit. Here's some of the mine platforms starting to go in for the mining district. We don't like straight edges on the edge of the layout. I don't think any of us do. And so we've all the way around the layout, it's being contoured and then puttied to make for an undulating edge. All the, this is just typical throttle holders and connectors for the DCC. And then a finished fascia edge and some of the equipment, including a disembodied drawbar. So this is an overall view. I took this yesterday, and as you can see, we're doing scenery, and so it looks like a bomb went off. I do sketches over photographs. I convert the photographs into line drawings and then do some sketching over the top. And it gives just a general guideline, kind of a concept for what we want the scenery to be like in each area around the layout. I just tape them up. Here you see the beginnings of the undulating edge here. We filled this in, this little gap here, And we're using a technique that Cliff Acker introduced me to. He has it's a kitty litter that's made of nutshells. And the stuff is amazing. It forms this sort of under surface, under structure. It's not seen, but it's a firm, really nice textured surface. And what we do is come back with Elmer's wood putty to fill in and make the contoured surface. Some of these other areas here will be all cribbing. A lot of cribbing around on the mine side. So this is a staging yard. It's not real big, and the trains are generally 6 cars or less. It has a Kitwood Hills turntable at this end. Those are really nice turntables that are offered by this British man, Simon Cox, with Kitwood Hill. He is very helpful. Whenever you encounter any difficulties. He also has a retrofit kit for his earliest turntables, so you can put an upgraded motor on it, which I've ordered one from him because I have one of his earliest turntables. Anyway, this is, again, Hoover staging. And there's also going to be an engine house over here. I'm going to go ahead and put some basic scenery in here so it doesn't just look like a plain old tabletop railroad there. And here's the track plan. The turntable also allows a reduction in the number of turnouts and the length of the yard. Elsie Creek. Elsie Creek has 2 control panels that mirror each other. One's on the far side of the peninsula here and here. And they both control all the turnouts in this area. So whoever is to work the yard and switching here has the ability to move to either side of the peninsula and still control the layout. This shows, it's a shallow, it's only 2 feet deep. So there are going to be a number of flats along here. Eventually, I want to get, I think it's an ISLA, imagine that, O-scale manufacturing building that can be put together in a number of different configurations. And one of them is a 3-foot long flat, which would very nicely fill in this gap. And then I have another flat that will go in down here. And this is the main town on the railroad. And so there's also on this little extension, which is off to the right here, is the car float. So the car float represents traffic from a mine on a remote location on a lake. It's kind of like up in the Kootenays with the Canadian Pacific's operation. Ran mainly, I think it was primarily a lumber operation, but the idea was there was a remote location. It was difficult to build the railroad there. And so they used a barge. This is the plan of Elsie Creek. Lumberyard along here, manufacturing. This is a fuel facility. This is a passing siding. This is for dropping off and picking up cars. This is a car storage. Engine service. What doesn't show here is there's now a large office building that I got from Steve DiPaolo, which was a model of a Pacific Coast freight house and headquarters for this Pacific Coast Railroad in San Luis Obispo. And then the car float operation. And then this is a downtown street lined with buildings currently under construction.
On that 3-way switch over there by the oil dealer,
Yes.
was that purchased or was that a kit?
Well, I had it built.
I
had a guy build it.
Okay.
It is hand laid. We were planning an op session just around the Christmas season out here. And the day before, I developed a dead short in this section of the layout. You can't run the layout without this. And I could not, for the life of me, find where the problem was. I've been rewiring the Y. And during that process, I started to, through the process of elimination, I remembered that when I first installed this 10 years ago, when this was all at our house in Edmonds, it had a dead short. And so I got out my magnifying lenses and looked at this, and by God, it had closed up a gap again, and it was a dead short. Yeah, cut the gap, bang, everything's working. So be careful with these if you have one. It can be a real headache.
Okay.
Moving on, this is Elwood Park. These are the two modules that were already had partial scenery on them. And you can see how it switchbacks up. This kind of disappears behind some scenery back here, comes back up. There's a small runaround track here. And this way goes up to the smelter and the log reload. And this side goes up to the mining district. Some detail of scratch-built trestle and Banta freight house. And this is a Banta station here. This is the track plan. And this is where it crosses under the trestle in that last slide. That actually has room for a 6-car log train. And so I'm thinking about staging something up here. I haven't quite figured out how to integrate it into the operations yet, but it would just be an additional disruption on the main line. As I designed this layout, I planned each of these sections with a specific purpose and concept for switching. I've tested each of them individually, and everything works the way I'd intended. And so the real test of all this will be like a fugue, like a Bach fugue, adding pieces to the operating bones, the backbone of the layout, and seeing how they all interact with each other. That's the fun part, I think, of operations and problem solving. So there's the log reload, here's the smelter track. These are temporary here right now. I'm building a smelter that'll fit this whole area. And the mining district, there'll be 3 more mines over in this area. And I'm considering building a separate little ON18 mining railroad that'll operate just on its own, just kind of back and forth kind of thing. There's some really cool little ON18 locomotives starting to show up now too. That runs on N scale track. So here's a plan showing the switchback, the smelter, and then a switchback up to the dry sort. This hits 8% here. So 3 log cars at a time is the limit. So you have to split your train when you're coming up here and split it when you're coming down. It just adds additional operating interest. Mining district is also set up with leading and trailing point turnouts. And the idea is if you have cars in front and in back of your locomotive, as you come down the hill, you can use this runaround to sort your train so you're shoving everything up to the smelter.
John, do you have a
Yeah.
level portion on some of those tracks to enable you to uncouple cars and have them stay where they are?
Yes, this is all level along here. And again, I've also tested it and everything stayed put. No runaways. This is a wider angle shot of Grotto. This was taken yesterday. We're beginning scenery. I didn't show the right side because it's full of clamps, all gluing stuff together. There'll be a large sawmill here. This is a river that's running down and under this pony truss. There'll be cliffs up here and a slope, but it's hard to describe. You won't be able to look directly into the pit there. This will have a ridge along here blocking the view. The idea is as you move around, you can see more of the river, and the river actually winds up into the scenery and disappears into the backdrop, but you can't see where it disappears. It's like a chasm coming down. And here's the kitty litter I was talking about. It just glues into place really nicely and forms a basis that you can spread either plaster or whatever medium you want to use. I like to use Elmer's wood putty for a lot of this kind of stuff. It provides a nice smooth paintable surface. And this is kind of from the other side. It's looking this way. The idea here is that, again, when you're coming up to switch these locations, you can run around your train if you need to. A mine run just pulls up in here and it shares trackage with the sawmill as a switching lead. So you can work the tipple. Your empties get shoved in here, your caboose gets tacked on, you build your outbound train from 5 or 6 cars in the tipple, pull down, shove down into the siding, come back up, and then locate or shove your cars into position in the tipple, your empties. And then you can come down, run around the train and return. The same with a log train coming up. Drop your cars on the siding, run around the train and shove up and work these sidings in the mill. So you're not blocking the main. And then finally, we've started scenery. This is Evans Park. This is just the base dirt layer. I'm still in the process of fussing with it, but I placed the buildings here so you can get a rough idea of the character of it. And then again, there's a sketch, this area right here, behind these 2 homes. There's a cliff that rises up and wraps around the corner back into the sawmills theme that helps disguise the end of the backdrop. It's a lot of dirt, and the mainline ballast is dirt and loose rock. There's nothing, no dressed ballast going on here. This is all very rough and ready. So again, this is looking east at the end of the run, end of the line. Again, a Banta water tank. I forget the manufacturer, Taurus, I think, products made this oil tank, and some Stony Creek kits back in here. It's a shame we lost Roger Malinowski last year. It's a track plan for Evans Park. And again, here's the time saver inspired switching puzzle back here on the back side. And I've test switched this, and I know how to do it, and I'm going to let whoever first operator is figure it out for themselves. But you pull all of the outbound loads before you ever attempt to put the inbound cars in, and then use these tracks to shove those cars for the outbound on this track and this track. There's room for 6 cars. And then you work the inbound cars, and you've got a little 1-car runaround here with virtually zero clearance between cars on here. But it allows you to get around your car and push, shove, or pull, whichever. And then the turntable here. So operations, just a rough outline because we haven't done it yet, but this is the idea. There are 3 round trip trains. There's a morning passenger train, which runs morning and evening. And it goes the full length of the railroad, and 1 freight that goes the full length of the railroad. All the additional trains run as turns. In other words, they're out and back, either from staging or from Elsie Creek. There's a barge turn from the staging yard to Elsie Creek to work the car float. There's an oar turn from staging to Grotto to exchange empties for loads. And I explained how that would work. A Grotto turn to general freight and supplies to Sawmill ore bin. So that's like a local. The Sawmill turn works off the branch line, as I mentioned, and it swaps power at Elwood Creek for a road locomotive, which in this case is like a Heisler or a Climax. And then the branch line job, which is just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And somebody can do that who likes to switch. It would keep you busy for a couple of hours, I think. So that's the general outline. There may be more jobs we can fit in, depends on how much congestion we get. So here's the barge slip, and this is a kit-built car float. I added some additional truss rods and stuff. This was the original kit over here, and it didn't seem to have enough structural integrity. So I added this arch here to help reduce the strain on this cable. Anyway, it holds 6 24-foot cars. And it really is not removable. You just treat it like an interchange track. The transfer bridge, transfer span, head frame is scratch built. These are just dowels, 1/4-inch dowels that are driven into holes in the water. This will get a coating of acrylic water at some point. Also, the green color represents a glacial lake. It's not, it's full of minerals, and that's what the color comes from. The mechanism here for the transfer bridge is 2 Berkshire Valley car pullers, which have winches and gears and a motor here. And I added a transfer shaft to the second car puller. That's what this is. It's totally made up. I guess it would work. I don't know. It looks good to me. Anyway, the wooden structure is all scratch built. The bridge is scratch built. You see, I haven't finished putting all my nut bolt washer castings in yet. There's a couple of different views. This has now been further developed here along this waterfront. There's a walkway. There are 3 buildings in here. I didn't get shots of that yesterday, sorry. Alan Murray built this vehicle viaduct, and it's a beautiful model, really nice. He's going to be taking it to the regional in May. He actually has he has a base that this thing can sit on, and then it gets locked into place so he can transport it. It's almost as interesting as the model itself. So this sawmill is now part of the modular group. I built it, scratch built this for use on the Northwest modular group, and I kept it thinking I was going to use it on my railroad, but it's too small. I'm going to build a larger facility. This now has the beginnings of scenery underneath it. Yeah, my buildings are just, it's a mix of different kits. This is a Banta kit. This is a Stony Creek kit, Evergreen Hill. I put partial interiors in them. So when you look through the windows, there's something in there. And there are lights, interior lights. And I rarely build the kit as designed. So Stony Creek Foundry. It's going to be Acker's Anvils. And then Banta Mine. And it has a full interior. This is the Evans Park Station. It has a full interior, and the Elwood Park Station. This is a
John?
Banta. Both of these are Banta kits.
I see pretty heavy anvils sitting on pallets.
Yeah.
What moves the pallets?
I haven't put the forklift on there yet.
What era forklift? Is it hand operated or would it be?
It's a more of a pallet lift, you know, that has a long handle on it and two forks that go under and you jack it up.
Sure. Yeah.
It's hard to find period stuff,
Yes.
especially I couldn't find a forklift.
How much do those anvils weigh? Prototypical.
500 micrograms. I don't know. They're heavy. There are also a bunch of them inside the foundry. There's also an interior here. This is the office, and there's a couple of desks and typewriter and stuff in there. And then the locomotives and rolling stock, they're all, for the most part, they're Bachmann, but with modifications. This is a Bachmann Davenport that I added additional detail to. This also has a keep alive, which you can see through the window. I have to hide that. I get lazy. This is a Bachmann 2-cylinder T-boiler Shea with a Banta cab and additional cast brass detail. And then the headlights are different too. I'll get into my attitude toward headlights in a minute here. This is a Grant Line Plymouth. It has a Northwest Short Line power truck under it. This is my other Shea, which also has a Banta cab, and it's been rode hard and put away wet. There's that Shea again. This is a Bachmann 260, which I converted to an 060 with a whaleback tender and additional details, new handrails, and then of course cast brass details, headlight, etc., and a new pilot. And this is just pretty much a stock Bachmann 2442. I have to do some modification on some of these locomotives because the couplers are too low. I'm using ON3 couplers that are up higher. And so some of the Bachmann locomotives are very low slung, and I have to do some modifications. Again, it's a brass headlight and an MV lens. And I don't run with headlights on. This is 1949 pre-FRA rule change on headlights during the daylight. It was after World War II. There were an increasing number of auto accidents with trains. And at the time, it was felt that they would be more visible if they had their headlight on. So I believe it was as late as 1956 was when the FRA issued the change. Railroads were already beginning to switch over to daytime headlight use, UP in 1951. But if you look at the narrow gauge books, Rio Grande Southern, virtually any shots during the daytime of Rio Grande or Rio Grande Southern freights, they didn't have their headlight on during the day. And this is a daytime operation. So anyway, I like the way MV lenses look. So there you have it. Rolling stock is kind of decrepit. This is a kit, a 22-foot boxcar kit that's commercially available. I added a bunch of detail to it. And this was a scratch built boxcar that Alan Murray and Rich Blake picked up a bunch of these. And I bought 5. They already had RCRR lettering on them, Rio Como. So I thought, hey, I got to add these. So what I've been doing, this is the first one I finished, is putting new handrails and stirrups and handrails and other detail. redoing the truss rods and putting McLeod Western trucks and Northwest short line wheel sets on them. Again, these are a couple of kits that I've added detail, platform, ladder, additional bracing, new truss rods. This one has no brakes, so it's got a brake wheel on each end.
That oil tank looks like a part of a tender.
Kind of, yeah, it does. You know, there was a lot of reuse of old bits and pieces on narrow gauge. And so if they could get some additional use out of a tank, they'd do it, patch it and use it for something else. This is a Bachmann combine. I surgically removed the car side and substituted a laser cut drover's caboose wall in here. Added some additional grab irons and stirrups and marker lights. And those are San Juan West Side trucks. So it makes a nice caboose. And this is another kit that was just a wooden tank car. And I added a platform and this other stuff and turned it into a fire car. Has a little steam pump on the end. So the railroad is divided into 5 electrical districts. The reason being, if you have a short in one, it doesn't shut down the entire railroad. Each is shown here in color code. The mining branch is its own circuit. And then of course, each sector from Elsie Creek, Elwood Park is on its separate circuit. Grotto's on a separate circuit. Evans Park is on a separate circuit, each with a circuit breaker. And it's well worth doing that. The electrical panels are a little different. These are pieces of tropical hardwood that Alan had laying around his shop. He brought them over one day and I started looking at them and I thought, you know, that might be an interesting way to do the control panel and add a little warmth to the fascia. These are removable, obviously, so you can get in there and if you need to work on the wiring. These are all turnout toggles. I did the taping myself. It goes really quickly. It's just chart pack tape and lettering. The X's indicate manual turnouts. So anything close to the edge of the layout, you can flip. I've got ground throws for all those, but anything at the back of the layout is turnout motors. And this is the mirrored control panel for Elsie Creek. And then the mines and reload. Also, they're difficult to reach. Anything that you can reach easily, again, is a ground throw, and anything you can't is powered. And this is a servo, a little simple bracket and crank here. And these are controlled by an Arduino. This is the upper end of that shaft coming off the servo right here, actuates the turnout points. And you do need to program the Arduino. And I have no idea how you do that. Cliff Acker did all this stuff. And I'm putting my fate in his hands because I don't know how this stuff works. And this is the Wi-Fi hotspot that we have. It's a Raspberry Pi. And so you're able to use your phone, your smartphone, or the new TCS Wi-Fi throttles will work with this. I'm also going to add an antenna for NCE radio operation. So we'll have, you know, people, if they want to bring their throttle, we'll have options for them. Any comments, any questions?
Thank you, John. That's really interesting layout.
Thank you.
John, this is Bill Metzger. You have many structures. You must have started building those quite a bit ahead of this layout.
Some of them I did, yes. Actually, the bulk of them I've done in the last 4 years.
Wow. Okay.
Well, that's a luxury of having 2 guys help with the layout. Because I can work on buildings while they take direction on what to do. So I'm kind of an art director as well.
Yeah. Impressive.
They've been a great help, and it's allowed us to push everything forward kind of simultaneously. So I'm hoping in the next year we'll have it scenic and ready to go.
I had one more question. Are you planning on hosting any op sessions in the foreseeable future?
Yes, I don't know how soon. I'd like to get some of the messy stuff done before we start that now. And that's going fairly quickly. So I'm not saying finished scenery, but the messy part of getting the base stuff in. It seems like every 6 months I have to do a serious track cleaning, turnout check. But I'd say probably sometime this summer we'll get started. We're going to do test ops first with maybe a 4-person crew and just start to see how each of these jobs interacts with the other once you put it on a single track main line.
John, I have a couple of questions. One of them is, what software did you use for making those layout diagrams?
That's Illustrator. It's Adobe Illustrator.
Yeah, you've really raised the bar for these layout tours, because being able to see the benchwork detail, the track plan for each town, it's really helpful and makes it really interesting. Another question I had is, did you build the benchwork so that you can take those sections apart that were illustrated in your track plan?
Yes. It's designed, it's not portable, but it's designed to come apart.
Right.
I just had to think about that.
We all do.
I'm getting old.
Yep.
Alan Murray's benchwork technique, I've seen it somewhere else before on 4D Zoom, and he's very good as a cabinet maker. I guess he does a good job. But I like the reverse L girder design where you have the main board on the outside. That's good.
It worked pretty well. I will say that it was kind of a pain where you had the need for a UTC, and it was in the side of the L girder. But you drill and saw it out, and it's fine. But other than that, it helps keep your fascia straight, nice and straight. So
the other question I had is, did you say the fascia was Lexan?
no, it's the straight sections are 1/2 inch birch ply, and the corners are all 1/8 inch Arctic birch. 2 directions on that stuff.
What is that material?
Hey, John, this is Alan.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
I believe it's actually a pine. The 1/8 inch material is a pine that's bendable.
Oh,
And what John was just about to say was that you buy them in 4x8 sheets. You got to make sure you're asking for bendable plywood, because the grain is set up so that it'll either bend in the short direction or the long direction. And I can't remember which number you put first to designate that. That was a key. I got almost stuck because I was trying to bend some plywood, the wrong piece of plywood on an inside curve, and it wasn't working for me.
So it's a plywood rather than a synthetic or a masonite.
Correct. It's pretty forgiving. You got to watch with your saber saws when you're cutting your profiling and things like that. Make sure you use a really fine blade. Make sure your saber saw isn't jumping up and down too much, or else you'll just be putting more putty on it, but it repairs pretty easy. And the other part is, designing where you're going to spline them into. Like, the reason we use 1/2 inch plywood on the straight sections is so we could put a spline joint there and clamp the 1/8 inch plywood to the 1/2 inch plywood and get a good joint. So when your outside curve of your peninsula is longer than 8 feet, it gets a little complicated because you've got to splice the 1/8 inch plywood somewhere along the way.
I used a product similar to that on my layouts, backdrops and fascia. It's a bendable plywood. It was originally an Italian product that I got through Compton Lumber Company, but they no longer carry it. And I understand that you can get a similar product now from Lowe's. Alan, where did you source that material?
We got ours from Midway
supply.
plywood.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Midway plywood, the guy retired last summer, so that source is gone too.
Yeah, but it's a good product because when you join it, you can then mud it over and sand it down, and you end up with a surface that's paintable. You don't even know there's a joint there.
We have had a couple of separations. Alan had noted that. How many do you think we wound up with, Alan? Where it's opened up, it just very slightly. It's just a hairline crack.
Oh, those were where we joined the 1/2-inch plywood on the backdrop.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, for some reason, even though we didn't glue them tight, but we put biscuits in to try to make them mesh well. I guess his room is really dry and all the plywood shrunk about 1/16 of an inch. So we get these little cracks at all those joints.
It's easy to patch, and because we did sort of a generic sky backdrop, it'll be easy to make that repair as well.
Yeah, and while we're talking about upcoming clinics, next month's second Saturday is going to be a panel discussion on using aluminum for bench work. And Magnus Christensen has been doing a lot of research on this. And Jon Bentz is building his new layout with aluminum bench work. Dave Kreitler has been doing all his new sections with it. So those three guys plus me and Lee will be doing a panel discussion on aluminum. And if you know anyone else who's experimenting with aluminum, let us know and we can add them to the panel, or they can participate.
Dan Kellogg has used it on some of his N-scale layout.
Yeah, that'll be March 11th. This same station, same Zoom log on, everything the same, except the month.
I got on the aluminum subject, away from what we're doing today. I have a friend that built a small switching layout. It was about 3 feet wide. And what he used is old industrial pulp mill cable tray channels. And it was excellent. Very light, and you can drill it easy, and you can do whatever you want with it. So that's an option for sure.
Yeah.
But you go to the scrapyard and get it, I guess. He picked it out of the boneyard of the pulp mill here, so it was free for him. Another question for John: you made several scale changes in your career or life from HON3 to ON30.
My name is John. I'm a rubber scaler. Yes.
That's quite a change.
Jacob, did you have a question?
Yes. So I was gonna ask, do you have this book, The Logging Railroads in Skagit County?
Are you asking me? Yes, I do. Yep.
Well, there's the one specific, it's about, I think it was the only narrow gauge line. But the one that used this
cool.
little contraption for operations.
Yeah.
If you wanted just a little something to annoy people out of that one siding that you were talking about that you said could hold a couple of cars, have one of these things run out and do something.
It's a great idea. Actually, there is a model available of that little Fordson locomotive.
Really?
In O scale. Yeah.
Huh, man.
So very cool.
And also,
great idea. I like that.
Also, if you're hosting an op session and you need another person,
Hey, okay. Keep you in mind, sir. Yeah.
You mentioned the Fordson tractor. Sierra West is marketing now a 3D printed Fordson tractor that's quite a nice piece of work. I just got one. It's 5 parts, and it's a really excellent backdated model.
What's the name of it?
It's Sierra West is the manufacturer.
Sierra West. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just go to their website.
I will. Yeah.
John, the kitty litter that was the crushed nut shell, do you know the manufacturer of that?
If you give me 2 minutes, I'll go get that for you. I'll be right back.
Yeah, this is Alan. I picked up my bag. I've got a bag in the back of my car from Mud Bay Pet Store, and it's crushed walnut shells. is what I believe it is.
Is it fine
But-
enough, you think, for HO scale ballast or for HO
Well,
scale?
you don't use it for ballast. You gotta
I
just.
mean, I'm sorry, for earth, for just cover.
We're using it where we need to contour some, and we don't want to be cutting up foam all day long to cut up little pieces.
Mhm.
It really takes the mixed glue, well.
Okay.
You almost don't have to pre-treat it with the silly water, but it soaks it up really well. And then when you go to put the putty on, you start by applying the putty with your putty knife, but you can't be trying to sculpt it with your putty knife. Have a little,
Naturally fresh,
there you go.
walnut
Okay.
shell cat litter.
Okay, thanks.
So
And-
just to be clear, you're gluing it down after you
Yes.
sprinkle it in the contour you want. You're putting diluted Elmer's glue or something.
Fixes it in place, and then you cover it with the putty?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's- What I was getting to explain there is once it's hard, once it's cured, you don't want to, you got to let it go at least a day before you start putting the putty on.
Mhm.
But what I do is I'll take and use my putty knife to get a bunch of the putty onto the surface. And then I have a little cup of water where I can dip my finger into it, and I just use my finger to sculpt it. And you get a nice smooth, you can push it into the corners you need to and things like that. You can get a little, transitions to the edge of the cork and things like that. And then you just let it harden, and then you go over the
Okay.
top with your dirt and other finishes you want to put on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember Paul Scholes used to love the idea of using paver sand for that same purpose.
Mhm.
Only the trouble with paver sand is it's so incredibly heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is a great solution for those irregular spots.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really light.
I'd put a question to the whole attending group here. I was under the impression that an inch of pink foam on top of my benchwork would help quiet the layout. But more recently, I've seen just plywood, cork foam roadbed, and then the train.
Mhm.
How many of you are laying track on plywood with nothing more than cork roadbed versus foam?
No, I would say most people do that.
Yeah.
And it's one of these subjects where there's a lot of chatter about how you can reduce noise, but it's not clear that what's that phrase? A lot of sound and fury signifying nothing, because the decoders are plenty loud enough, so it doesn't seem to really make any difference.
Yeah. Decoders have solved that problem. The
Yeah.
way you deal with sound is use dissimilar materials.
Right.
And 2 or 3 layers of dissimilar materials, whether it's insulation board or there's all kinds of ways of dealing with it.
I mean, the advantage of insulation board is it's so much lighter if you ever want to move the thing.
Yeah.
It's getting very expensive though.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
My modules, all the track work has 1/2-inch plywood that's been let into the foam using a router. And I've noticed the difference of what mine sounds like versus John's 2 modules that he had with the layout. When you run a train across it, you hear a different sound because he's straight onto the foam itself.
We need to find an acoustical engineer that you can talk to, Bob, who will just drive you insane with talking about different frequencies and frequency distributions and absorptions and oh my goodness.
By the
Well,
way,
I haven't constructed my layout yet, and in fairness, the trains won't be moving more than a scale 10 miles an hour on it.
Mhm.
But we're planning on doing homosote on top of 1/2-inch ply,
that'll
and then
work.
just and since I'm modeling a little decrepit branch line, no, I'm not going to be using a road bed. It's just going to be directly laid onto the homosote.
Mhm. Yeah.
By the way, Alan Murray's clinic on Benchwork is outstanding. I think that's in our files, isn't it? In 4D?
No, I don't think we're recording those at that time. I have it still.
But you've presented it at several of our clinics.
Well, I got two options. I've been asked to present 2 clinics in May. Do you think I should bring it out?
That would be outstanding. Honestly, that's probably one of the best pieces of work that I've seen. And of course, your finished product. And well, a good way to see Alan's bench work is to go to Monroe in a couple of weeks, because the modules that he shows there are done with his technique.
Yeah, we'll be there for sure. We got our notice the other day. But okay, I think that's what Al Lowe's waiting for me to say what my second topic's going to be. So with your encouragement, I'll do that.
I was going to go back to the acoustics thing for just a second. What I did was I glued foam board onto just pegboard and for the layout, but my layout's mounted on the wall. Going into the other side is the living room, and I was concerned about noise propagation from the layout into the living room. So I put an inch and a half of the foam on the wall and then mounted from that. And I turned the vacuum sweeper on the inside of the room and see how much noise came out the other side. And it was really good at attenuating from the noise.
Go back to the roadbed sound. I've witnessed several layouts with the splined roadbed, the Formasode on top. And I think by far they're the quietest that I've ever observed.
Keep in mind that the ballast, once you put white glue in it, is very hard, and it becomes something of a sound propagator. So one of the ways to mitigate that a little bit is to make sure that your hard shell scenery does not come up to the ballast. Leave a little bit, tiny gap there, so that you've got a dissimilar material as the joint, and you eliminate making the whole surface a soundboard.
Or guitar.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. You've got a whole bunch of pockets that are basically sound chambers underneath.
This is a favorite subject among model railroaders. I made the mistake years ago thinking that if I used liquid latex to glue down my ballast, that would get rid of the problem that Russ just described. And it did, except that liquid latex, if you've ever had a very old rubber band, it falls apart. After 20 years, I'm having to re-glue all my ballast because it's all the liquid latex bond is no longer good.
Oh, wow.
And when you're building your layout, you're not thinking about 30 years later when you have to come back and re-ballast everything. But that's where I am.
If you're going to redo your track work, why don't you go ahead and jump into SN3?
I was just going to. Al Frash always used to say, you need to convert this to N scale.
There you go.
Oh dear. That was not the direction I had in mind with that story. Okay. So gentlemen, are there any other questions for John?
I have a question for Russ real quick, if I could ask it.
Go ahead.
So you built your layout in a space with a pretty noticeable slant right above the layout. I was wondering
the lovely slopey ceilings. Yes.
I am encountering a very similar space restriction for my layout, and I was wondering if you had any recommendations.
Well, normally that knee wall goes up about 48 inches high. That's the width of a sheetrock panel. That's what the contractor usually did.
That's the same for our case.
Yeah, the trick is to make sure that you've got as much attention-getting features on your layout surface so that your eye's not looking at that darn slopey wall. But specifically, you cannot paint a backdrop on that slopey wall unless your artist is very good, because the slopey part brings it right close to your eye as you're standing there, the higher you go on the wall. So the fellow that did mine deliberately painted the closest parts of the backdrop to my eye in such a way that they are not attention gathering at all. Painted the further away piece down toward the 48-inch high portion of my layout with a lot more detail. It's just a way to trick the eye. The other thing to be careful of is lighting. If you have light fixtures up above and they shine down on the wall, make sure that they don't cast sort of fingers of light coming down. You need to have them spread the light out, not into a narrow beam, sort of. And then finally, as Max McGinnis pointed out to me one day, I had several of mine on a light bar or a track lighting, and they weren't all pointing in the same direction. So I had shadows crossing each other. You want to make sure that your lights are all headed in the same direction.
What if you were to hang a few clouds forward of that slope, making them even closer to head batting, but some of David Yaddick's clouds, just to break up looking directly at a wall? Here's a cloud in your way.
The only problem is, one of the problems you have is you've got guys like Magnus over operating on your layout, and he leans in to uncouple a car. He's going to hit his head on that damn ceiling
Cloud.
or the cloud. So I don't want anything that. That's why I didn't hang a fascia board.
Yeah, and the
down
cloud
from
would
the top.
the cloud would draw your attention to it as well.
But Bruce Hanley did put fascia up above to hide the lighting, and he has a similar sloping ceiling issue. And he's going to present on Off the Beaten Track sometime fairly soon. But those of you who've been to my layout, just if it's a big problem, tell me about it. But it's no longer been an issue.
No, those foreground details are killers. They really are. Yeah.
The only other thing to be aware of is just don't have any tall structures that are going to cast a shadow on that sloping wall.
All right, Jake, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had just an electrical, as some people are wiring stuff. I noticed on one of John's drawings, he had a Y going into a yard section, and I think it was in the sawmill portion, and he had a turntable within the Y. So is that a double reverse, or do you have a split rail turntable, or? That's what I have in my yard. I have a Y coming in, and I have a turntable, and I just did the split rail one.
Well, it's two dual frog juicers. One is just for one leg of the Y, which is isolated and is the switching section, and the other is just for the turntable, and everything else polarity matches.
Okay, that's a good idea. Yeah, because you had 4 or 5 tracks going into that Y, I think.
Yeah, it's actually a double Y on one side. It's 2 legs, but I made that
complex.
Yeah, well, no, I made the one single track leg of the Y, the reversing section, and everything else, the polarity matches.
All right, well, I think that is enough for one day, and we'll see you a month from now. Thank you very much, John.
And
really interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we all look forward to seeing that layout at some point in the next couple of years.
Great.
And
Outstanding.
Next month again will be a panel on aluminum, so bring your questions to that, and we'll see you all hopefully at Monroe, if not this coming Thursday evening with the backdrops panel.
Excellent.
See you all later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.